Good afternoon, everyone. We just had a little bit of a, you guys getting feedback, Lee?
Yeah, I just fixed it.
Okay. All right, good afternoon, everyone. Hopefully the audio is broadcasting okay. If not, please type in the chat box and let us know. All right, so I'd like to welcome you to the January Lake States Fire Science Consortium webinar. This is part one of a two-part series that we are hosting and partnering with the Great Lakes Phragmites Collaborative. Part two will be hosted by the Phragmites Collaborative, and that will take place on March 12th, 2015 at 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Central. I'm Jack McGunstinski, and I'm the Program Manager for the Lake States Fire Science Consortium. I'll be moderating the webinar this afternoon. We also have Catherine with the Phragmites Collaborative, who is also on the line, who may be able to answer questions. For those who may be joining us for the first time, let me give you a little background. The Joint Fire Science Program is funding 15 regional consortia. They're also known as Fire Science Exchanges that are across the country. Our mission is to accelerate the awareness, understanding, adoption, and sharing of wildland fire science information by federal, tribal, state, local, and private stakeholders across the Lake States and the adjacent Canadian provinces of Ontario and Manitoba. We strive to be inclusive and neutral science partners working to foster collaboration among researchers and practitioners and organizations and individuals, and by developing innovative approaches to science delivery, while facilitating dialogue about new science findings and emerging needs. Before I get started, let's take a few seconds and look at our webinar interface using Adobe Connect. If you'd like to ask any questions or interact with the attendees, please use the chat box that should be located in the lower right-hand portion of your screen. Make sure that once you type your question, you click the send button. We will be monitoring these questions and will make sure that there is an opportunity to address them. If you'd like to learn more about the Lake States and what we are doing, please visit our website. You can also sign up and receive our newsletters and announcements. You can also follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Now on to today's webinar. Lee Osterland is a fire management specialist with the Michigan Department of Natural Resources. Lee's career in natural resource management began in 1984, fresh out of Michigan Tech University. He took a job with the U.S. Forest Service in Wyoming after a few years, and then moved back to Michigan to work with the Department of Natural Resources as a forest fire officer. Lee has worked in 5 different field offices around Michigan, which allowed him to build his experience and expertise in a varied environment. One of Lee's long-term goals, instilled in him by other Michigan DNR fire mentors, is to continue to build and expand the prescribed burn program within the state. This not only means putting fire on the ground, but also building relationships with the many agencies and individuals who have an interest in prescribed burning. He enjoys the challenges of high complexity prescribed burns, never turns down an opportunity to get involved or manage one, but only if the risk can be mitigated, with safety being the first objective. Currently, Lee is a fire management specialist, and his primary responsibility is the Lower Peninsula of Michigan. So with that, Lee, go ahead.
Thanks, Jack. Like Jack mentioned, one of my goals is to share ideas, but also get ideas from other folks. And we've talked about Phragmites and some of the experience we've had with the DNR and burning Phragmites over the years. And I expressed an interest with Jack of how can we get more information? How can we get folks together to share ideas? For the most part, maybe not reinvent the wheel, because someone may be doing something that another individual is struggling with. And if we can bridge those gaps and get that dialogue started, we'll all be better ahead. I do have a strong interest in burning. And like Jack said, it's a 2-part series. First part, we'll talk a little bit about just a general overall what we've accomplished in Michigan with burning and some of the lessons learned. And in March, we'll get more of the tactical end of things, how we were able to break up units, mitigate some of the many issues involved with this species. As the photo shows here, dealing with Phragmites, as with any large grass fuel component, you get some pretty good spread rates and large flame lengths. In addition to what the photo shows, high smoke output with particulates. And in the case of Phragmites, and as cattails, it's a black smoke similar to smoke coming from a tire fire. So why do we want to manage Phragmites? What's the big deal? Just burn it. Sure, lots of folks have heard that before. The Phragmites, just by the nature of where it's at and how it gets established as an invasive, and invasive is just that, it likes to be messed with, it likes disturbance, and it's highly adaptable. And quite often, they follow people around. And with that, as this photo shows, it burns right up the yard edges. It blocks the view of a water course. Folks love where they live, and we're living on a body of water. A big part of that is seeing the water and what's going on out there. And with Phragmites growing up to 20 feet tall, and some areas dense enough that it's a challenge to walk through, that view is inhibited, and people go to great lengths to get that view back. Quite often what happens is Phragmite is very happy when you put fire into it. Comes back a couple feet taller, stems are thicker, more robust, and denser. So quite the opposite happens. Person doesn't have a game plan. That's what we try to talk to the managers. Come to us within our department. Our department, like many large agencies, it broke up in a bunch of different divisions. Forest Resource Division is the division I work for, and we're the ones who conduct burns, make it happen. We work with land managers so that they can meet their objectives. If we look at this photo, we've got an individual standing in a bunch of Phragmites. That brings me to the question, can humans and people and Phragmites coexist? They can, but it's kind of an interesting relationship because people hate Phragmites for the most part. He's as big, and Phragmite seems to follow it. Whether it be along a railroad tracks here, you can just imagine a train going down the tracks and creating a vacuum, sucking in the seeds and stuff and transporting it miles and miles away. You got road corridors. This particular site is in a Sterling State Park down in southeast Michigan. That park itself is a great success story on using fire to manage things, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. But where there's people, there's a transport of invasive species. And in this case, we're talking about Phragmites. Just another shot of the area. This is one of our prescribed burn units in the park. And you'll see several slides of it throughout my presentation because it was a unique site that created some unique challenges for us. And here's that phrase, can Phragmites people and fire coexist? Yes, but you better do your homework. Quite often what that means is you better get a 5,000-foot view look of what you're trying to accomplish. Because not only is it the Phragmites itself and just the phenology of it, what makes it tick, but you need to look at the whole big picture of when that stuff burns, black smoke, where's the smoke going to go? In this particular case, we've got I-75 right along the corridor here, right up the regular burn boundary. Up to the north here, you've got Detroit, smoke receptor. You've got smoke receptors all around this burn unit. And that factors into our long-term planning. I like to tell folks, you can burn just about any site once. What I mean by that is, don't do your homework when they're urban setting like this, and in this case managing Phragmites. If you impact a lot of people, either with the flames, scaring people, dumping smoke on a road, possibly causing an accident, dumping smoke in a subdivision, you're going to get lots of complaints, and it could cause that program in that particular area to be shut down, no more burning. I was involved in a ground level Sterling State Park writing some of the first burn plans, and that's what we discussed is very little room for error. But the only direction we could dump the smoke was out to the Lake Erie. We need a southwest wind component. Any other direction, we're going to potentially impact people, park users, factories, subdivisions, you name it. And we decided burn year 1, year 15, year 25, you got to hold that high standard of no exceptions. Easy to cut corners or say, hey, we got all people here, burn it today. Might impact some people with a little bit of smoke. What's the big deal? Coexist. You got to hold that high standard. Look at all the aspects of it. You get in high recreation areas such as this, plays a role in the seasonality. That's one of the things I'm going to talk about today. What's the best season to burn Phragmites? And we've successfully burned Phragmites all 4 seasons here in Michigan. Years ago, we were really limited by the equipment we had. Pretty much had to burn it, burning in the wetland environments. We were able to get some boats with the mud motors on it, use of airboats, that type of stuff. Expand our burning opportunities, not just in the wintertime, but in the summer and spring and fall as well. We'll talk about that a little bit later, and again in March when we get into tactics. But one thing you got to keep in mind with a high recreation area, most of the recreation is done in the summer months and warm months. That might impact burning during those times. Just keep that in mind. And again, when we get with areas with high populations, we've got structures. Phragmites, tremendous heat output when it burns, flame lengths upwards of 100 feet at times when you get to 20-foot fuels. In this particular case, the fire was several hundred feet away from this structure and it melted the vinyl siding on it. Yes, it was a prescribed burn as one of the lessons learned, and we have since adjusted some of our tactics, lighting, and increase our awareness level of it. It's not just the structures there, it's the equipment on the ground. Get too close, you can damage equipment. And the big thing about burning any high volatile fuel, such as Phragmites, you got to have trained people. Every fuels are a little bit different, whether it be jack pine, prairie grasses, and Phragmites is one of those beasts that a lot of people don't understand. Getting the burning of it, you just got to have that awareness level. Have the right equipment to do the job. Here's the aerial shot of a site near Saginaw, Michigan. This is a combination of both Phragmites and cattails. It's about 1,000 acres. And like I said, Phragmites loves people, and quite often the management we're trying to do, we just can't get away from that relationship. Where we need to burn, there's people there. This particular site, we've got those of you who are familiar with the Milwaukee Bridge and the Saginaw River off-ramp of I-75 is right up against the line on the west side. We got Saginaw out to the distance. We got Bay City off to the north, subdivisions all around us. High recreation area as well. And this is a waterfowl production area. One of the things we needed to do to really meet our objective was to draw the water down. Now, drawing the water down on a 1,000-acre area, not a simple feat. And it's almost a year-long process to get it drawn down and dry out. And what that means is we're going to impact some of our recreational users, waterfowlers. So a big initiative to educate the folks, let them know what we're doing so it's not a surprise, as well as the folks in the area through press releases, using Facebook and Twitter to get the word out. This is what we're going to do. Eventually we're going to manage this area with fire. Everybody be aware of what we're doing. Worked out very well with not aware of any complaints. We're able to mitigate just about all these issues. Biggest factor with burning Phragmites is the smoke output, large amounts of smoke. And as you can see in this photo, this is the way we used to do things years ago on the ice. We had to do it in the wintertime. We're dealing with southeast Michigan. The winters there aren't like northern Michigan, and it's not always a given that we're going to get cold enough conditions to be burning on the ice or form solid ice. And what that means, if you're developing a management plan and relying on just a sole winter and the ice to accomplish a lot of your objectives or your operations, you applied for a grant, and a grant has a 3-year life cycle, you're bumping up to the end of that. So it wasn't a really good situation we were in. We're looking at how can we continue burning Phragmites, expand our seasonality, get into different seasons, yet keep in mind the phenology, what's the best time of the year to impact the Phragmites, get it done, and reduce their components of the ecosystem. Here's that slide again of the Sterling State Park. We dealt with all issues there. We looked at the summer months with recreation. We looked at us burning in the winter. First time I went and did a site visit, it was in the winter time. Water level was low. We're at the mercy of the Great Lakes. And I thought, yeah, we can do this in the winter time. Most of the Phragmites is high and dry. Don't have to deal with the recreational users. Of course, we had all these other issues with any prescribed burn, I-75 and all that, but thought we'd be able to do it. Got the game plan together, wrote the plan. Water level rose in the spring, iced over. Water level dropped back down, so then we had that ice shelf, which didn't make it safe to walk on it. So we struggled with that for a couple seasons. Eventually, we burned it in the summertime. The water levels were down, and we got some pretty good results. And we actually did burn it a second time as well. Now there's a water control structure here. I believe it was a Ducks Unlimited grant the Parks Division worked with, and it's a very ecologically sound site. It's a good one to see. It's always good to see the results of burning in conjunction with other management objectives or prescriptions to see the results. Just as a side note, we talked about Twitter and using Facebook to get some of our word out. And that falls in line with contacting our cooperators such as MDOT. They put signs out. But our local dispatch centers, the first time we burned this, I called the dispatch center. Hi, I'm Lee from the Michigan DNR. We're going to be burning this site. I explained it to them, said, okay. Later that day, even though with all the signs out there, a number of 911 calls from motorists actually overloaded the dispatch center. And they had some technical difficulties there. Fast forward a couple of years, got ready to burn again. I called dispatch center. Hey, it's Lee from the DNR. We're getting ready to burn this site again. There was dead silence. Like, I could just envision them thinking, I remember last time the day's going to be busy. But you gotta reach out, get folks going. Parks Division has done a really good job down there reaching out to their neighbors. Successful burn program, and I think we'll continue on with years to come, keeping in mind smoke receptors. So if you get the time of year, burn, wet or dry site, controlled versus non-controlled water level, altering fuel arrangements. All things that we've learned in the past, burning Phragmites, things I'm going to talk about to share with you folks. Some of you have probably done some of this, some of you maybe not, or maybe you've done something different. Please share that information so we all can learn. Spring, summer, fall, or winter. We've done it all here in Michigan, burning Phragmites very successfully. This slide depicts a burn we did. It was December 15th. Temperature is 18 degrees, RH 42%. Wind southwest blowing it away from I-75. 75 to 100% cloud cover with snow flurries. And then a couple of key things I want to point out that is very critical if you're developing a burn program dealing with Phragmites. There's some figures that we've learned over the past that plays a real important role in getting this stuff to spread, burn. RH 42% we got here. We found that 60% RH is kind of the threshold of burning. We get above 60%, it just doesn't seem to spread very well. We can mitigate that somewhat by getting a higher wind, but even then the the spread does not carry. It drops down and peters out. Well, keep in mind that 60%. Get below 60%. The lower below 60% you can get, such in this case, you can increase some things that typically aren't conducive to prescribed burning, and that's cloud cover and snow. If you had a cloud cover and you're, say, 55% or 58%, probably would not have been successful on this day because it just wouldn't have spread. That lower RH worked good. And then this fuel moisture, stem moisture, 22%. Guiding rule of thumb figure we use is 19%. Our marsh fuels, cattails, and Phragmites. If we can get that stem moisture below 19%, get some good spread rates, as well as lateral, and sometimes backing. The lower that stem moisture, the more options we have to accomplish our objective. Now with Phragmites, we've learned over the years that you have to herbicide it before burning. Well, reaching that stem moisture with sprayed Phragmites is pretty easy normally. Normally what we're burning with is 2 to 9% stem moisture. Where that 19% comes into is on some wet sites, and I'll talk about that here shortly. Wherever that 19% figure, close to it, it seems to be that's where that stem gets burned off. So if we've got getting down to the ground and maybe we're burning with 6 inches of water or 12 inches of water, we're going to burn over top the water. Where that water meets, eventually maybe 6 inches above it, we're going to reach that 19% threshold. Then when that Phragmites burns off, basically you have like little bungee sticks sticking up. It's hard to walk through. If you're in a waterfowl area, it's used for waterfowl hunters or bird hunters, pheasant hunters. You got dogs that will tear the dog's pads up. So that's a lesson we learned, and we try to get it down flush with the ground. I'll talk about towards the end here a technique we've used to almost ensure that flush with the ground. Also keeping our burn window open as big as possible. Critical. We need to keep our window open, give us as many options as possible. Get the burning done, your objectives. On the flip side, we burned, such in this slide, 102 degrees or 104 degrees, 38% RH, winds west, clear sky, fuel moisture is 2 to 17%. Now you notice the fuels, the Phragmites. This was a sprayed site, sprayed several years prior to us burning. Typically we want to burn Phragmites within a year after it's sprayed. The reason for that is we got the leaves on the Phragmites. It gives us that fine fuels to let it spread. Now it only will spread downwind, but it will spread laterally and even backing. If you let it stand for a couple years, you get basically a bunch of pencils sticking up there with no leaves on it, not much ground cover, so you have to have the wind. You have to have a stout wind upwards of 20 miles an hour. Let it run through there. Even then, we don't get much lateral spread. So ignition operations are more complicated. This site, Phragmites, when it's green, typically won't burn, but we're used our weather conditions at the time to our advantage. We were in an extended drought in southern Michigan, the agricultural fields. The farmers were having a tough time with their corn and soybeans. We recognized our drought code was up over 400. Our BUIs, are the way our fire spreads, was well over 100. Took advantage of the fact that this had been sprayed about 5 years prior. There wasn't much of the dead component left, but enough to carry the fire through, get us some good spread. Use that drought, allow us to burn these green fuels, such as what you got in the slide here, get good results. And that human factor, again, applies with burn crews and within our own agency sometimes. There's a lot of doubt on the burn crew that I was involved with that this would burn, almost to the point where let's go home. But no, there's other factors involved. You got a drought condition, fuel moistures are going to be way low, and we got good results, and we learned a lot. The whole burn crew learned a lot, and they take it back, and it's kind of a domino effect sharing this information. Yeah. Next slide we got here. I'm not sure why that other slide didn't load. So this slide here, jump ahead 2 slides. We burn in the winter, like I'd mentioned, using the water courses. So we've got the 2 extremes that kind of bracket our experiences here in Michigan, and we got a whole bunch of stuff in between. When you're using water courses, there's some safety issues. It's not the safest thing to be working with equipment and stuff on the ice. We've dropped pieces of equipment through. We've had people fall through. That's a risk, additional risk in a risky business that we try to get away from, when we're able to get away from it by utilizing some equipment.
Hey Lee, this is Jack. I'm going to break in just a minute because we had a question. It's relating to the green sites when you're burning the live fuel. The question is, how much fuel consumption did you get on those green sites?
It was 100%. The key to that was the drought code. Even though it was green, the stem moisture was way down, almost below 20%, even on the green stuff. So that, coupled with that dry biomass from the spraying, the herbiciding, and I was amazed. It slicked it right off. It was a great learning experience. The whole crew learned a lot. That particular site was then flooded shortly after we got water back in there, which helps inhibit the growth of Phragmites if you can get it over those burn stems.
Okay, and we have a number of other questions that we typed in, but we'll hold them till the end at this point because one of them was asking what this next slide is up, so I'll let you continue now.
You know, I'm not seeing anything on my computer, Jack, from the slides.
So it's the Great Lakes slide?
Right now, it just showed up with the weather indices, which had skipped a slide. Yeah, the Great Lakes slide did not show.
Okay, I apologize, folks. We're having some technical difficulties here, apparently.
But I'll just go ahead with this next slide. The prior slide was just showing the Great Lakes Fire and Fuels website. And we talked about burning that green Phragmites, and why we were able to do that was we took advantage of the drought condition, which if we were in northern Michigan, we were under extreme fire danger, which if you see on this slide, we would not have been able to burn. All burning was shut down, no burning permits. But in southern Michigan with this fuels, we recognized, hey, this is an opportunity to get this site burned that we hadn't been able to get to in quite a number of years. Let's utilize our drought code of 415 and our buildup index of 112, which is ridiculously high. We took advantage of this in this environment where the threat of wildfire wasn't as severe, and we're able to accomplish one of our burn goals. And you can do that. This is available to everyone, some of these sites. This is one of the raw stations, one of our fire weather stations. You can access that stuff through that Great Lakes Fire and Fuel site. Through that site, you can also jump on a Meso West, which will give you some information on the weather conditions. There's other ones out there, such as Fire or WeatherBug, Fire Underground, Weather Underground. I use those a lot. I like those because it gives me 10 days out, an idea what the weather is going to do. Then I can do some long-range planning. We got the National Weather Service websites, which are great to give us a forecast, such as this one here. And the reason I have this in there is when we're burning anything in the urban areas, you need to be cognizant of both the threat of the fire spreading out of control, which everybody does a pretty good job of that now. It's the smoke receptors and the particulate receptors. And what I want to point out is we utilize the ventilation index and transport winds a lot burning in the urban environments, especially with Phragmites and cattails, because of the dense nature of the smoke, the black smoke, and where's it going to go. You can have the ground level winds in one direction, and you can have these transport winds going in a completely opposite direction. That's going to dump those particulates where you don't want them to go. In the case of burning along Lake Erie, we've got a west component wind, which typically we want to blow it out in Lake Erie. But if it gets up there to this 5,000 foot level, and then it does an about face, and we get an east component, it'll dump it right back into our urban environment, which we don't want. So it's critical. Use this ventilation index to get it up and out of the area as quick as possible, up into the transport winds, and then carries it the direction we want. Very critical components, almost as critical as the Phragmites, as I said, that 60% RH, get below that, get below the 19% stem level, increase your chances of success. You have to utilize this ventilation index and transport winds as well. We get in a dry site versus a wet site. We've talked about seasonalities. We talked about maybe summer's the best time, but then you got a lot of recreational users. Maybe the winter time's the best, but if you don't got a cold enough weather to develop ice and you don't have the mechanized equipment to allow you to work in a marsh environment, that might be out. Look at all aspects. Spring is usually a good time for us to do some burning, as well as fall. But a lot of the areas we burn in are areas that are utilized for wildlife or waterfowl hunting. We don't want to impact the waterfowl hunters, so we eliminate that season to burn. So whenever you can burn in the fall, that's an option as well. What do I mean by dry site versus wet site? We can burn over top of the water, like I said. You could have 12 inches of water, 6 inches of water. We got dense enough stand of Phragmites that we've sprayed. We can burn across the top of that. Keep in mind that water level can be our friend in helping control Phragmites. Just by the nature of how the plant grows, we can get some water over top of it after we've treated it, burned it or whatever. That water over top of the stem, studies have shown, will inhibit its growth. So that will aid us reaching our ultimate objective of controlling this invasive species. So keep that in mind when we're talking about the next few slides here. You got a site here. This is Erie State Game Area in southeast Michigan. This is part of the Point Mulier State or waterfowl area. Guys down at Point Mulier, Zach Cooley, Joe Robinson, have done a great job, and his staff, of getting a great program together managing Phragmites. They've been going at it since about the year 2000, writing grants, working with Forest Resource Division. They work with Wildlife Division, getting this partnership going, getting a great Phragmites management program going, and they've done very good work, working with herbicide, what works, what doesn't. They've learned, working with glycophosphate, Imazar mix is best. Overutilize Imazar, which is a long-term effect in the soil. You're impacting a lot of beneficial plants that might help keep Phragmites out of the area. A lot of good stuff going on there, and I can't say enough about that area and the work those two guys and their staff have done. This is part of that area, Erie State Game Area. First time we attempted to burn this, it was like this right here. There's a lot of water in there. There's standing water. We thought we could burn over top of it. Conditions weren't such. We're pushing at 60% RH. It was in the spring. Stem moisture wasn't where we wanted it, but we had high winds. We only can burn with one wind direction of west. We had that part of the puzzle. We thought we could make it work. It did not work. Couldn't get it to spread. So we fast forward a month or two. Ducks Unlimited project was progressing. They were able to get some dikes, some the water control structures in place. The water level was drawn down, dried things up, went back, was able to burn it successfully. Now a large part of that was because of that water. We got that out of the area. Large part of this was just rid this area of biomass. It wasn't too much of a concern how close to the ground we burned it. We wanted to be able to manage the site, do some work, plant some native grasses in there, and we just needed the biomass removed. This was a regular waterfowl site. We would have been very concerned with burning this Phragmites down as low as the ground as possible to eliminate those bungee stick effect. This is a site, that dry site. This was in March, where we used to do all of our burning for Phragmites. See some of the temperatures, RHs, just to give you some idea of the critical components in ventilation index of 900. Getting those winds, those RHs down below 60%. Fuel moisture, years ago, we weren't real up to speed on that. We didn't take the readings. My guess is this was down there, had to be down below 19% to get the results we achieved. As we progress and learn stuff through any management plan, what to focus on and what not to, and we've learned that stem moisture is critical. So if you can get an area where you can control the water, you can draw it down like the previous two slides. If you get an area where non-controlled, some of the things to watch out for, this ice shelf. We got ready to burn this site. All the conditions were in place. The humidities were good, stem moistures, all that. Looked at the site as the upper slide here where the pointer is. Things look good. Yeah, we got ice. We can get out there. However, when we started exploring it, there was an ice shelf about a foot to 2 foot level of clear space. What had happened is, in the fall, high water levels, ice formed. The winter went on, water levels dropped. We had this clear spot. We called off the burn that day for the simple fact we would not have been able to burn this down as low as we wanted, down to normal water level or below, for both the getting rid of the bungee stick effect, but also try to get water over top of this stuff in the spring when the spring rains come to help us use that Phragmites component. Utilize that water level to your advantage. We found with 20 inches seems to be the things we key on. If we get 20 inches above this stuff after we burn it, above the burn stems, we got some pretty good luck with Phragmites as well as cattails. So here's our slide again. We got this slide. We talked about the wind direction. We talked about the various things of burning this horseshoe shaped. Initially, going out there in the wintertime, things looked good. Water came up, formed an ice shelf, and did not allow us to do our operations. We learned a lot from this particular unit the years, and I refer back to it quite a bit just because of the learning curve. Another site, Uncontrolled Water. We burned this in February. These are some of the factors that you want to look at. Again, RH 48%. Not much wind, but if you get all these other factors in line, don't need that much wind to get the Phragmites to spread, the fire to spread in Phragmites. If you've got a couple years after spraying it, you've got those pencils sticking up, or you're upwards of 60% RH, stem moisture is nearing 19% or a little above, you have to have this wind component up there in the upper teens or 20s to get it to spread the way you want it. Here's another slide, same February, time of the year. Some of the things we looked at, we higher gusts, and this is what we're dealing with in urban environments. Just that black smoke and that particular. This leads us up to the current stuff we're doing now. There's a lot of cool stuff going on, utilizing the newer technology. We talked about years ago on some of those earlier slides back as, not too so long ago as 2010, we did not have the ability to get out different times of the year in a marsh environment. We utilized some of the fields the waterfowl hunters have used, airboats, some of the boats with mud motors on them, shallow water running, and this marsh unit such as this Marshmaster. Then we had an exchange with the Great Lakes Forest Fire Compact. We went over, chatted with our friends over in Ontario near Windsor, Long Point. They were doing some cool stuff with rolling Phragmites, knocking it down. Because of some of their environmental constraints, they can't burn during the summer months. They have to burn only in the winter because it impacts some of the invertebrates and stuff in the non-winter months. We met with them. This is one of the units they use. They're gracious enough to show us how it works, show us some of the sites. This was their roller. Took that back to Michigan and applied it to some of our burning. We didn't have a setup like this. We did have an Argo unit like this, Centaur. Didn't have a roller, so we utilized the next best thing. Utilized the regular cultipacker pulled behind a farm tractor. On some of the sites we could actually get into with wheeled units. And then we were also able to utilize the Marshmaster with just the tracks packing it down in conjunction with possibly brush hogging. Here's a site, we started to roll it with the cultipacker with the farm tractor. This again is on a Point Muley State Game Area, not too far from the headquarters. And we successfully rolled an area across the road, jumped over this area, we got a couple passes done, and the tractor got stuck. We got it out, got stuck again, and finally decided it's not going to work with the wheeled unit. So we utilized marsh master, our marsh units, to lay some of this stuff down. And what we were trying to do was just get it far enough away from the road, because there's a power line here, kind of where my pointer is, and we didn't want to melt the insulation on the power line, so we needed to get it away from that. And the bulk of this stuff in the center we left standing. That's just another option for you to roll this stuff to get it down. And you can use wheeled units like in this slide to roll control lines, and I'll talk about that in March. What does that do for us? One of the slides that we could not see was a slide of this site prior to us burning it. It was a winter slide. Right here where the cursor is a water course, and it showed ice on it. And if you're an ice fisherman, you'd recognize that ice looked pretty rotten, nothing certainly we're going to walk on. But also I want you to realize, Joe, there's a power pole right here, and that slide that we weren't able to bring up on the screen showed a power line going right across, kind of like where my arrow is. So we had some logistic issues that we were not going to be able to burn standing Phragmites right there because damage to the infrastructure. Couldn't really do it in the wintertime because of the non-ice and the threat of the spread to adjacent Phragmites stands on private property. So after we met with our friends in Ontario, Canada, they gave us some really good information, techniques to use. We applied it. We were able to roll the site with a farm tractor with a cultipacker. And I want you to pay special attention to some of the figures we've got here. Time is 9 o'clock in the morning, July 11th. That's one day later. That slide where I showed you was 105 degrees. This is the day after that burn. Fuel moisture 2 to 22%. RH 50%, winds about 5 miles an hour out of the west. We need a west wind. Precipitation 2/100ths the night before. And all this is very important. Expand our burn opportunities with rolled Phragmites. The day before, like I said, it was 105 degrees. The crews were nearing heat exhaustion, brutal conditions. It was right next to I-75. We had chunked the unit up in a manageable unit to mitigate the smoke issues. Got done with that unit. We were going to go to this unit the same day. We had some mechanical issues with some of our engines. We were not able to get to this site. That night it rained. We got their crews together at 7 o'clock in the morning, got out to the site with fire on the ground by 9. It had rained, and there was a lot of skepticism again. Rain, it's not going to burn. I thought, you know what, I think it's going to burn. That Phragmite packs down so dense. There's so much fuel loading there, tons per acre, upwards of 7 to 8 tons per acre. I think we're going to burn. The top layer is going to be wet and moist, but that stuff underneath is going to be dry as when we rolled it the day before. You got an early start. The wind, onshore winds from Lake Erie, the phenomena where the land mass is drier than or warmer than the Lake Erie. Around 11 or 1 o'clock in the morning or in the afternoon, it starts sucking out that cool air off the lake, and we get onshore winds per mile up to 5 miles inshore. So we take a west wind, turn into east wind, and that impacts our smoke receptors. We got an early start. Even though we had some rain, things weren't what appeared to some folks ideal. Worked out really good. This was a site prior to the burning. You see the power lines, you see the tall Phragmites. We rolled it. This is what it looked like. We went from nearing 100-foot flame lengths the day before with 105-degree temperatures right along I-75 to a site, fairly remote site, not too, certainly quite a ways away from I-75. Structure's not real close. The flame lengths, maybe 5 feet. Easy conditions. We did strip firing, fairly relaxing. And one of the crew members even mentioned, you know what, after yesterday, this is boring. And as a person in charge of all this stuff the last couple of days, I said, you know what, boring sometimes is good. So it was more of a relaxing time burn, but we met our objective, and this just shows you differences between those two burns, what we were able to accomplish. This was the day before. This was the day after with rolled Phragmites. What that means to the public is not as many complaints. See the smoke, a lot of dark smoke all at once. With the rolls, you just don't seem to get that. Smoke's more manageable. And it allows us to burn in areas such as this backyard. There's no way we'd be able to burn Phragmites in the backyards all this infrastructure here, but I would not have any reservations at all to roll this Phragmites and burn this stuff. Of course, with the proper winds blowing away from these structures, we would be successful. Did that burning underneath the power lines. And the objective of all this stuff is to reduce the Phragmite loading. And remember those bungee sticks I talked to you about, cutting up the dog's feet and making it tough for people to walk through, and if you got a beach setting, people cutting their own feet? What we learned from the roll that we hadn't anticipated is it tends to burn this stuff right to the ground. It must be just that condensed fuels, hot enough, burns it right down, and it was a side shoot off of just basically getting a high volatile fuel more controllable for burning. And that is an offshoot, and that really caught everybody's attention, what we can do with that rolled stuff. And we didn't notice anything more, really didn't notice any more with after we burn the stuff, you're going to get some resprouting of Phragmites, but it makes it easier to come in there and spot spray it. We didn't notice it reducing those sprouts, resprouting anymore. Probably some because it's impacting some of the roots and rhizomes in the soil more because the heat's concentrated. But as we get more into that, some of the stuff we'll be watching for is, are we going to get this result every time we burn? Probably not. Majority of the time I think so. How is it impacting that resprouting of Phragmites? So a summary of this, utilize all the tools in your toolbox to get the job done. Look at seasonality. Talk, communicate. I just attended a prescribed burnings session the last couple of days. Communication was big, sharing ideas. The folks in Ontario shared some ideas that they were doing. Very appreciative of that. Applied that in Michigan. A different set of tools, but we got the job done and it worked out very well. There still is a place, of course, when you're doing rolling ahead of time, you're going to increase your per acre burn because you got more mechanical treatment involved. Keep that in mind. There still is a place for burning standing Phragmites because it reduces the cost of the burn. Results are the same. At this point, I haven't seen much difference between a reoccurrence of Phragmites resprouting because you always get some of that. You have to come back in and spot treat it. But in areas such as Sterling State Park, great job. Utilize the weather anomalies such as that drought condition that we got into to be able to do some burning which you normally might not be able to do. One thing, some of the studies I've seen, talking about state park here and in game areas or any areas, burning seems to stimulate the diversity of plants coming back in. There were some studies done out of Ohio. A group got together, did some just herbiciding sites, just did a study of herbicide and burning. They did herbicide burning and reseeding the sites. Any of the sites that were burned seemed to have a higher mix or component of vegetation than just the herbiciding alone. Trying to get things back like at the Sterling State Park and the way things were years ago, native vegetation, requires a way to introduce that or help stimulate that as well. And with that, that pretty much wraps up my presentation. Glad everyone was able to attend. Hopefully, keep in mind sharing your ideas. That is huge. I can't say that enough. Jack and I talked for a year or so to want to do something. I approached Jack, helped me out to get more information on this stuff and burning, what works, what doesn't. He encouraged me to do this and share some of my experience is what worked and what hasn't, but also to help solicit input and help from you folks out there listening. Tell me your experiences, send me some stuff, email, get with Jack, and let's share those ideas. That, Jack, it's all yours.
All right. No, thank you, Lee. You better take a breath because we got quite a few questions. So we're going to try to address all the questions that are typed in, and please type more in if you have them. But we're going to start the question and answer session by kind of looking at two overriding themes, which should be, Lee, kind of if you could describe briefly what are the goals and objectives of some of the burns, and then where is there any pre or post monitoring? The rest of the questions will feed into that.
Okay. Yeah, that the objective should be the driving force of any land management, and that's certainly true with prescribed burning. The sites that I showed you varied a little bit. That particular site that I showed you along I-75 near Saginaw, that was a combination cattails, maybe more cattails than Phragmites. That was to reduce the vegetative load and create like a hemi-marsh, try to create openings in there that were beneficial to waterfowl. A big component of that particular site was to get the water level down that I talked about, do the burning, remove that biomass. They can get that water level back up as quick as possible, try to get 20 inches above the stems, these fuels. And at the time I was told we could get upwards of 36 inches of water over the level. And that was the objective there. There were some mechanical issues with the pump. We were not able to get water in there in time. So we missed that window and vegetation came back. But now we're going to plan B, going to do some spot spraying in there, create those openings. So that was the objective of that one. All the other sites that I had, the objective was reduce the Phragmites component. And it was a two-prong approach. Herbicide it. We found that you cannot just burn Phragmites. It makes it happy. You'll get more back than you bargained for. Started with herbicide it, burn it, try to burn it within a year and a half after spraying for a number of reasons. We've got these grant cycles we talked about. Part of these grant cycles are, okay, once you treat it, burn it, we need follow-up treatments. We need that monitoring effect in there. If you're bumping up the end of the grant cycle because you weren't able to accomplish it in that year and a half, that creates challenges, but also that fine fuels, those leaves on that Phragmites, allows it to spread better. You get better, makes burning it easier. You get that lateral spread, you get that backing, as opposed to just long, narrow runs. And I'll talk about that more in March and show some photos of that. So it increases your chances of success. And then after we burn it, what they did a lot in Point Muley and that site is Sterling State Park, they get water back in there. They follow up with spot treating. You always have to follow up with some spot treatments. And get that cattail component back in there. We found once you get that cattail component back in there, it helps choke that out. Just as a side note, on one of the sites in Erie that we were prepping for a burn one year, we had Marsh Master in there, put control lines in. Our control lines was just mashing the site down, breaking the units. We weren't able to burn it that winter, but that spring the water level at Lake Erie came up quite a bit. Part of that burn that we had made that line came underwater with about 15 inches of water. Where that control line was came back to cattails, and I'd never seen that before. I wish I had more documentation on that, but just getting that water over there, 15 inches or so, inhibited the Phragmites, and where that 20-foot line was, all came back to Phragmites for that half mile. That same unit, which was farther inland, which the water, raising water level didn't impact, Phragmites came back, but it was 2 feet taller than the original Phragmites that was there. So it was a very drastic comparison there where water level in and itself, not even burning, shut the Phragmites down. Right next to it where it's higher, where water was not over top of that mashed down Phragmites. Phragmites came back with a vengeance.
All right. So you may have kind of touched on this then kind of with your overview answers, but I still want to kind of go through the, I believe we have 7 additional questions, maybe 8 now. So I want to make sure those are addressed. So the first one, is there any difference in regeneration when burning in different seasons?
We have not noticed anything. Again, the monitoring part on that first question, I didn't touch on that much. We're really getting into the monitoring part. We've always monitored what works, what doesn't. That's how we tailor our burn operations. In the training session I attended the last couple of days, we really hit on the need for that. That's one of the things I'll be watching. You know, does the seasonality affect how this stuff comes back? It always comes back. My experience, it doesn't matter if we're burning in the winter, the spring, the summer. We always get some of those resprouts back. That's why I tell folks, you know, we can manage it. We can manage it with fire. It's got to be in conjunction with herbicide, but you got to understand after you burn it, you got to get right back in there. You got to have money for herbicide and to get in there that year, start spraying it before it gets to that 15-foot level again. I have not seen much difference yet, but that's something that I'll be focusing on monitoring.
Okay. Second question is, how do you determine stem moisture?
We've got fuel moisture probes. They're the same type of probes that are used in the lumber industry, the mills. Check the moisture in sawn lumber. Use the same thing, or you want to make sure you get one that goes down, right down to 0%, but also as high as 50% or so. We always check the stem moisture with these gauges, and you can get these from your forestry supplier catalogs, or you can send me an email and I'll let you know which ones we use. Take it down right near ground level or ice level, because we want to burn it down as low as possible. Ideally, within 6 inches of the ground, if we can hit that magic 19% mark, life is good. Sometimes we can't do that, or it's not necessary, and we'll take moisture readings up the stem just to see what type of, where that 19% is.
Okay. Third question is, was there a reduction in Phragmites the year or years after a growing season in herbicide treatment? Spring season burn and herbicide treatment?
Yes, I went back there that following summer, as I always do, these sites to try to get an idea of, again, what's working, what isn't. And then even in that rolled stuff, I thought just by the concentrated heat of the rolled would really impact the resprouting. But I didn't see much difference from the resprouting and the rolled stuff and the stuff that we typically, burn standing. That's something to really watch for. And maybe some of you folks out there, maybe our friends in Ontario, if you're listening, who's done this rolling for longer than we have, are you seeing anything different? The growing season burn, the following spring, we did still have stuff resprouting. I did not see much difference.
All right. Fourth question, is there any effort to plant native marsh species after burning the Phragmites?
There has been. Parks Division has explored that and used some of that. One study I referenced, folks in Ohio were looking at the effects of fire and seeding and stuff. They talk a little bit about that. I'd have to refer you back to the folks, Parks Division, Sterling State Park, or Zach Cooley or Joe Robinson down in Point Mulier. I think they have done some of that. I don't know all the details. If you send me a note, I can get you in touch with those folks and they can fill you in more.
Okay. And the next question will be kind of a two-part question is, what kind of vegetation are you seeing come in after these various burn treatments? But that can be linked to also, what are you doing for like your pre and post vegetation monitoring?
That's right. It does have an influence, and a large part of these sites, especially in the waterfall areas, if we can get water in there afterwards, that's what we're doing. So that influences some of the stuff that's showing up. But again, I would refer you back to Zach and Joe. They're on the site, and there has been some invasives. We get rid of one invasive, Phragmites, and on another site, something else comes in there that we hadn't bargained for. So you have to be careful there, and it's just a constant struggle, and again, follow-up management with that stuff. And again, I would refer back to those land managers who are burning for more specific information on what's coming back in the long term. You'll get stuff coming back right away, but I look at the long term. What are our long-term results?
Okay. Did you have any issues with peat fires or fires in organic?
No, and that's something that we talked about. We got into that drought period, and when you get the drought codes up in the 400s or anything much above 300, the ground fire, the peat fires, is a real concern. And due to the fact that this particular site was a site where we could get water introduced into it, we can control the water level, we were going to burn it and dump water in there right away to help control the resprouting Phragmites. That was not a concern, but that certainly is something that you need to be concerned with. If you're not in an area where you control the water level, getting in a drought period, you could get those organic fuels burning, have that extra work.
Okay. The next one is, are there any issues with water quality following the burns, say due to nutrient release and ash production?
I'm not, I haven't been exposed to any of that. I haven't heard any fallout from our cooperators or other agencies in reference to that. I haven't really, made that a top priority to track. Certainly, one of the things that, we're concerned about burning in a wetland environment is, what herbicides we use. There's regulations on that. What is the impact of our mechanized equipment going to do? We're always cognizant of that. And of course, anytime we're burning invasives, we want to minimize the spread of getting that stuff in the tracks and on the units to make sure we decontaminate it before we move it. And of course, that's true of the water quality. There's invasives in the water from moving that from one spot in our water units to another spot. As far as the ash fallout and stuff, I have not, don't have much information.
Okay. Let's see. We got a whole bunch of questions still coming in. This is good. So one of the questions, when burning flattened Phragmites, are you stuck with smoke that's staying near the ground? Or have you changed the smoke to loft to avoid nearby residential areas?
If we're still using all the components that I pointed out, that is critical to doing any Phragmites burn that we've learned that is important. That's the ventilation index. You still want that high as possible. You want a good ventilation index. You want to pay attention to those transport winds. You want to make sure 20-foot winds or winds on the ground is what most people key on, because those are immediate smoke receptors. But you don't want to use that ventilation index to get it up in the transport winds and dump it someplace else. So, yep, we're still concerned about all those things. The smoke output, we still utilize ventilation index to get the smoke up and out, but we just don't have that heavy, black, dense smoke associated with burning the rolled stuff that we're seeing with the standing stuff. A lot of it has to do with the way we're able to light it, strip lighting, taking our time. As I mentioned, it's a boring, more relaxed way to burn things, and that's very important in dealing with these fuels that basically emit the same type of smoke or smoke as dense as a tire fire.
Okay. Another question is related to the rolled frag, and it's, can you get away with a higher stem moisture in the rolled Phragmites compared to standing?
Keep in mind, most of the, or all the stuff that we're burning has been sprayed. So that in itself, it's pretty rare, unless it's recently rained or raining, that you'll get stem moistures much above 15%. Typically, we see 2 to 9% on the sprayed stuff. So if when you're rolling your stuff, keep in mind you want to roll it when it's dry. We roll it when it's dry. Keeping the thought that if we roll it during the rain or immediately after the rain, where this stuff is wet, you get that dense pack on the ground. It's going to take longer to dry out. So we rolled it when we mashed it down, rolled it when it was dry. We had rain on top of it. That rain was not enough to soak into it, and we were able to burn it. So yeah, on the top layer, you could get away with higher with the rain stuff over 15% or 19%, because you're going to get that stuff underneath it that's drier to heat it up, preheat it, and burn it. So I guess in a way, yes, you'd be able to burn it higher moisture, but as long as that stuff underneath it was still underneath that 19%, you'd still. Once that rolled stuff gets wet, it takes a long time to dry out.
Okay. Next two are related to burning and spraying. First one is, how soon can you burn after spraying Phragmites?
A lot of times you see, not immediate effects after spraying, but typically the spraying is done in August and September here in Michigan. That's when we see the best result. We're immediately planning. We've got the burn plan rotor ready, And any time after we're seeing the effects of it
Sure.
drying out, being dead, we're burning that winter. We want to give it enough time for that herbicide to move around in the root systems. Be cognizant of that. That's, a couple weeks that is done. And then once that stuff is dying off, we're burning it.
Okay. And then again, related to the herbicide part of it, the next one is if you cannot burn a site within about a year after herbicide, what are some alternatives that you can think about for removing of the biomass?
Well, we burn sites upwards of, 5 years after it's been sprayed, but what happens is that stuff is still going to stand there. You're going to have what we call a bunch of pencils standing up because those reeds are pretty durable. You just lose all those
Yeah, I responded, sure, no problem.
fine fuels, and we'll get that component in there, or lose that component.
Sounds good.
We just have to use the winds so they're higher. But as an alternative to it, you could roll it. I mean, once you get that biomass down, or you can mow it. That one slide I showed of a Marshmaster with a brush hog on it. We've done that to put lines in. It's just it would take longer. It's certainly why people want to burn it. The cost per acre is less. But like the sites where I said we mentioned, we rolled it down, the water level came up. We hadn't planned on it, but it did come up, and it accomplished our objective. On that strip, we've got cattails back in there. So there also are some alternatives out there, but your cost per acre is probably going to go up.
Okay. A few more coming in here. Just to clarify, is it right that you saw extensive frag regeneration, depending on the water level, in the fire lines that have been sprayed and rolled, or have they just been rolled?
Can you repeat that again, Jack?
Sure. Yeah, Matt Davies is asking, he said, to clarify, did you see extensive frag regeneration depending on the water level in the fire lines that have been sprayed and rolled, or did it just occur where it had been rolled?
No, unfortunately, in some of the sites we're burning at, the burn opportunities, the window to burn is so ridiculously narrow that sometimes it takes us several years. We just don't get the winds we need. Couple that with the onshore winds from the lake that I talked about makes it tough. So quite often we'll treat a site, get the lines in, roll it down, and what ultimately happens if we're much past a couple years, we get that frag starting to grow again. And where we put the lines in, say mash it down with a Marshmaster or roller, it seems to come back quicker if we don't get that water over top of it. Like that one site that I told you about where we had the water, it actually eliminated the frag, cattails came in. But where there was no water, the Phragmites came back a lot denser than the other stuff, and we still had standing Phragmites there that had been there for several years, and the new growth was starting to come up through that Phragmites, but it had been struggling for a couple of years to do that. But in just like half a year's time where we had rolled it as a control line, that stuff just exploded. So yeah, we do see a difference there.
Okay. And again, we're talking more about the use of fire, but obviously we're linking fire with other control methods like herbicide. And we have somebody asking, do you know what type of herbicide and concentration active ingredients were used?
So the components of the herbicide that is typically used with our folks in wildlife division, it's got a glycophosphate component to it, Imazar. There's a bunch of different brand names to that. And in your wetland environment, there's some environmental regulations that gives you approval to use one type over another. Get specific stuff, again, so I don't give you the wrong information, I would refer you back to our guys at the Point Mulier Management Area. They've been doing this for a long time. They've tried a bunch of different mixes, and they could get you what has worked and what hasn't, and that is Zach Cooley and Bill Robinson.
Okay. And with the slide that's up, Lee has provided his email contact information. So, if you have questions like this, Lee, I'm sure you'd be happy to get the emails, and if you'd be just forward them to the people that may have the information. or do your best to answer through email.
Absolutely. If I get some information, I don't know the answer to it, I'll get it for you or steer you to the folks that will help you out. Yep.
Okay. And, I'll make sure you feel free to also contact myself or Catherine with the Phragmites Collaborative, because we may be able to at least run down answers for you. We did have one suggestion from Bob Williams. He said if you don't burn the Phragmites, you can always cut it and drag it to areas of the site where you have access paths if you want to try to raise the grade in wet areas. So that's an alternative use initially. I don't see any other questions coming in, but we had quite a few questions. Lee, you need to take another breath.
I'm doing good. I'm enjoying it. I'm hoping folks are going to be contacting me to share their experiences, what has worked, because that's what it's all about, is sharing those ideas and increasing everybody's knowledge.
Definitely. Well, definitely want to thank you, Lee. Before we kind of get off the webinar, I just want to quickly point out this is part one of a two-part series. So part two of Lee's talk is going to be March 12th, at 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Central, and you can find the webinar registration links on either the Great Lakes Phragmites Collaborative page, or you can find it on our Lake States page, both places. And then I would also like to highlight we have another webinar coming up here in February 19th. That's at 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Central. That's going to be on the long-term effects of repeated prescribed burning on tree growth and drought vulnerability in red pine forests in northern Minnesota. And again, you can find those links on the Lake States website. So with that, I just want to, again, say thanks so much to Lee. And Lee, we obviously haven't let you off the hook because we're going to be doing the second part on March 12th. But I want to thank you again and thank everyone for participating today. Make sure you all have a good rest of the day.
Thanks, Jack.
Thank you.